Hello, welcome. Today I am joined by Adam Goode. I've known Adam for a number of years now, and he kindly gave me a tour of London on my last visit. So, Adam, thank you for joining. And how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you for having me, Andy. Yeah, good to sort of get into it. See if I can shed any light on my career today, and yeah, hopefully give some people some pointers on different paths, various points of development you can sort of take to ultimately get to where you want to be, I suppose.
Yeah, no, well, having spent some time with you, I'm sure you can add a lot of value into that. So where are you talking from today?
So today I'm at our Roehampton clinic, which is our sort of newest acquisition. For those who don't know, I work as group clinic director at a company called Pure Sports Medicine down in central London. We have 8 clinics now, and the Roehampton clinic, which is based, I suppose, within the grounds of what's called the Roehampton Club, which is a private members club. And then we sit within a separate building alongside of it in those grounds. So we acquired this in October of last year. And then the challenge thereafter was turning it into a clinic that was sort of more synonymous with the rest of the brand, updating IT systems, note systems, etc. And a long-awaited sign-off from CQC has finally come in order to get our docs up and running here as well. So providing a new service line that previously wasn't here as part of the practice, and again bringing it in line with the remainder of the clinics. So yeah, exciting. Hence why there's a small portable ultrasound in the back, because we have one of our docs, Farhan, coming down for his first clinical shift this Thursday evening. So yeah, an exciting development for the staff here, part one, but then also for the local area. So it's just Roehampton. It's kind of midway between Barnes and Putney. So more of a West London base for us, aligned with our Rains Park and Kensington clinics, which are the other two out west. The remainders sit more centrally in and around sort of central London, the central business district.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. Having been to quite a few of the pure sports med sites, it's great to see you expanding and developing. I know John Etherington's recruiting a lot of that on the sports doc side. I think the private medical space is really interesting, and you guys are definitely at the forefront of it. So well done for what you're doing there, and I'm looking forward to digging into how you've progressed in what you're
Yeah.
doing. So I know you started as a physio, and just before we go into that, I was actually listening to a podcast recently where they were saying, I think it was Stephen Bartlett that was saying that he looks at someone's CV, at how much they've progressed within a firm, rather than seeing people that jumped around. And having looked at your time at Pure Sports Medicine, you've had a number of different roles in that case. So yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into it. But like, what's your just a quick overview of like what's made you want to stay at Pure for this long and do the different roles?
Yeah, I suppose I don't know if it's the age I grew up in or sort of my parent sort of natural upbringing that sort of led to I suppose the work commitments that I have. But for me, it's very much not saying the same as the Stephen Bartlett necessarily, but my viewpoint on CVs, etc., and how we review them from a recruitment point of view is, in order to get into the nitty gritty of a role, minimum 2 years is sort of the natural point that I look at and go, right, have they stayed in a role? Would they have learned much in their physio journey today? Or if they are going 6-month role, 6-month role. And yeah, my CV, even if I go back before Pure, I did a number of years in other roles before, I suppose, not necessarily learning as much as I can, but before feeling like I developed and was ready for either a change or a new role, and whether that was in the NHS previously or more recently with Pure. But yeah, I suppose early on in the journey, I made a move from a band 7 role into Pure. And at that point, then it was just something different from the NHS, something different from large assessment clinics, 20 minutes for an assessment and churning through large volume without any sort of natural follow through on the end game from people's return to play or performance. So then the natural steps, I suppose, from Pure thereafter were, there was always something else around the corner, always something else that either enticed me or kept me integrated into the sort of process of personal growth. And then naturally, I've played team sports my whole life, and I find it hard to, well, I've always found it hard to see myself working as a lone practitioner or even doing my own thing. And then the more I sort of naturally learned about the business, the realities of doing my own thing, I think felt more distant, because I know how much effort each of us from an individual point, whether it's the middle management, the senior management team, themselves, which I naturally sit in, I saw the levels of effort going into that to make a success of a business. And I saw it as something that, well, that's the team and everyone pulling on the best of their abilities to make this happen. So naturally, for me, that's just, I suppose, snowballed. And then, yeah, whilst I probably feel part of the furniture now after 10 years, I'm still growing, I'm still learning, still sort of seeing new opportunities from a personal growth point of view. And the business very much still then has, I suppose, challenges within it for growth. And our growth aspirations still exist and are still happening, basically. So, yeah, it's kind of always something exciting around the corner, but being part of something bigger, I suppose, ultimately is why I've stayed for so long. And I like to think, at least, that I've worked with so many amazing people, and from a point of view of leadership and management, each of those individuals I've tried to take the best things from. Inevitably, I don't think you get it right. Everyone's got to be their own personality. But having learned from so many of these people, I sit back and look at the senior management team that I sit in, and each one of us is different. But each one of us, probably the imposter syndrome from my perspective, but each one of them is pretty amazing at what they do and has so much to bring, that I would find it hard probably to work with a bunch of people who I respected as much as I do respect the people I work with directly and the people who influence the business, basically. So, yeah, it's a pretty good place to be. I think our challenge is, how do we get the rest of that for everyone who sits either in the middle management or then the sort of who come into the clinics as a brand new clinician working for ourselves. How do we make them see what I see, wanting to be inspired by the people you're around, and grow in a way that I suppose has helped me quite dramatically, I suppose, in my personal development.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, you can see that, and I can see how invested you are in it. And I think it is really great when you do get into an organization that you really believe in and you buy into and you want to contribute to, as well as learn, but also teach. And I think that's a really nice place to be when you've got that. Well, when you've got, I'm actually listening to a Netflix book now, and it's talking about culture and about having the right people in there, that you're living in or working in an environment that's really challenging, but very exciting. You turn up and you know you're going to be challenged, but you know you're going to develop and contribute as well.
Yeah, I think that the idea of culture is always good. I mean, our CEO is, again, having, I suppose, worked with other people in high level leadership. He's, from my point of view, a character who's so easy to chat to, but as a New Zealander, so the sort of famous New Zealand quotes that get bandied around culture and teamwork in terms of sweeping the sheds or no dickheads rules, is ones that, yeah, they also really align with my viewpoints. Not necessarily in our pure PSM culture and/or dynamics, but I think we're all of a similar ilk in that regard. And yeah, holding people accountable, working for the best interests of our patients, trying to push the business forward, part one, but also, I mean, you'll see it some more if you look at John or Claire, who are sort of chief medical officer and chief clinical officer, or the head of medical, sorry, for John. Claire just going down the CSP route now that's a selfless task, and it's one that she's doing because ultimately she's an inspirational character who's trying to push forwards the profession as a whole, and where the private profession is supported as much as the NHS profession. So going into the CSP council is, yeah, it'll be a baptism of fire, but she's doing it to grow the industry and ultimately better sort of, I suppose, our viewpoints and naturally the support networks that then exist for private companies like ourselves, or private practitioners. So yeah, it's the cultural thing around growth and support and challenge is a big part of why, yeah, I stay around, but also why I was intrigued to come on board in the first place.
Yeah, well, going back to how you got involved in the area then. So how did you, where are you from originally? I know you're not a southerner by background.
Well, I'm from the northern. For most of the people I work with, I'm very from the Midlands, in terms of where I grew up. So yeah, I was born up in Cheshire Way, in sort of Nantwich, Leighton Hospital. But then, with links with my dad's job, basically we moved to Staffordshire. So just near St George's Park, really, probably just near there. And I spent my early years and high school there. Always involved in sport, always sort of, I suppose, excelled in sport, but was never good enough at any one of the sports I did to make a living out of it. But I think back in the day when I was sort of going through my A levels or to the end of the academic early process, you were good at sport. Naturally, I think you went on to do sports science. So my first degree was up in Liverpool, which I did in sports science. Quickly realised towards the latter end of that further academia at that time felt like a long way away. So staying on to do an MSc didn't really feel like an appropriate decision. And I think, done with studying, let's say, after 3 years up in Liverpool. I had a great time, brilliant city, but ultimately then didn't know where to turn next. So that finished and I've written all these down because I'm terrible with dates, but I finished that in June 2004, basically. And then had in the back of my head a 6-month period where you'd be looking, going, right, what do I naturally do? And I think back then it was sports science into probably being a PE teacher. And then I stumbled across an MSc, or the pre-reg MScs, and they were just developing the course for the first time at Birmingham University. So naturally I picked back up with my football career back at home and golf, and then proceeded to apply to the MSc. And the first year that went through Birmingham it was due to start in January 2005. So there's a 6-month window where basically I was having a good time with mates from home, football lads, and sort of living the dream, as it were, living at home, but not really having any responsibilities. And then I got accepted onto the MSc course. And at that point, I didn't know that I wanted to be a physio. In truth, it was just the next logical step. And somebody had offered me that in January 2005. And the flip, I suppose the other alternative was staying on to do a PG cert that would start 6 months later. So with my parents sort of naturally advising me probably to get started with something sooner rather than later, I started the pre-reg MSc at Birmingham in 2005. And again, I'd say for the good 2 years of that course, to be brutally honest, I think I coasted. I was very much putting time and effort into football and golf, which was sort of every Saturday night, Tuesday night under floodlights. So, and a decent standard, but was never going to make any more of it other than doing that for the Saturday nights out after with a group of 20-year-olds. And I think it was only as I got towards the latter end, so I started then doing the placements that are naturally associated with that. And at this time, physiotherapy was really quite hard to get a role in. This is when recruitment was really hard. There was loads of competition for roles, naturally, for physios coming out of BScs and or even MScs at that point. But I think I was lucky, and I think, yeah, if I look back at all the roles, the progressions and natural things, I'd say, yeah, whether it's hard work or not, other people may say differently, but from my point of view, I think I've been really lucky in my career. Right place, right time. So I was fortunate to do my last 3 placements actually at Burton Hospital, which was a sort of a local hospital called Queen's Hospital at the time. They've subsequently merged, I think, with Derby Hospitals. So it's Burton and Derby, I think, now. But I did well on my placements. I really enjoyed being in work, i.e. engaging with other people, the team members, and obviously having done 3 placements in a row, starting to learn some of the faces that may well be in either the junior roles, or alternatively some of the MSK clinicians or the orthopedic team. So I went back and back and back from a placement point of view, and yeah, it stood me in good stead because naturally, having then finished the MSc in 2007, I went straight into a role at Burton Hospital on their junior rotations. And again, even looking back there, the junior rotations were slightly different. They had a rheumatology rotation. They had what was akin to probably a sports gym. So in your outpatients, you'd have behind the sort of natural cubicles, but they also had then a sports gym where there was a couple of clinicians there, a chap called Steve Caswell, who I think he's no longer in physiotherapy. I don't think he went into medical sales, but a physio who was doing him as his MSc at the time, who again really just, I suppose, showed me what you could achieve and what you could naturally do from a drive perspective and trying to push yourself and push the profession forwards. And again, yeah, so did naturally then 18 months then as a junior rotation, and living the life in Burton-on-Trent. But then living the life became something that started to trickle down and become a different thing, because all my friends and my best friend basically was working, very intelligent guy, he was working for Travis Perkins for a period after his BSc, his degree in physics and philosophy down in Bristol. And then he sort of said, well, I probably can't do Travis Perkins for the rest of my life. And he then got a job in London, which is then where all my friends from home are then basically based in London. So it became a natural thing for me to start looking at avenues of progression thereafter. So after 18 months, I took a job out in Essex with Princess Alexandra Trust as a band 6. And actually, I only stayed there for 6 months, which probably, was it 6 months? Something like 6 months. It's probably the first time really that I feel like, not that the job didn't fit me. It was great. The people there were good. It was just the commute was out. It wasn't really what I moved to London for. So I was living in Essex at the time and traveling up the M11 to get there. And I kind of was looking then at other opportunities that came up. Was this going to be the place that really drove me forwards and progressed me in it? And there were lots of good opportunities. They had good CPD, good internal CPDs. But it was more the traveling out that didn't quite sit well with me in terms of this isn't why I moved to London. And then I suppose thereafter, fortunately, I applied for a band 6 role at what was Mile End Hospital. Before Mile End Hospital then became Barts Health, and naturally now has sort of Europe's biggest NHS trust as it was when I was there. So I then went into what was classified, I think initially as my first rotation as the Mile End Sports Gym, which I don't know if you've ever been down to the QMUL site there, but they had a recently refurbished gym, and there was a chap called Mike Glover again, the supporting band 7, who kind of took me under his wing at that point. Really, again, an absolute character, great guy, but knew his eggs and would naturally be driving you forwards as an individual. So it really did challenge me clinically. And there was a couple of us then as band 6 who did the rounds thereafter. So I managed to dodge on calls, much to the disappointment of the rest of my band 6s, but that was primarily because I was, for the first probably 18 months, I was based solely at Mile End. So there are a series of natural rotations you would do in that facility before then going across to the Royal London Hospital, which at that time only orthopaedic sort of outpatients was based at the Royal London Hospital from point of view of MSK provision. So yeah, and that then naturally progressed into a band 7. I think that exposure in the sports gym brought was a lot of sort of prominent clinical people in my progression. So obviously Dylan Morrissey was at that point leading the QM Masters. So we had what was called the Combined Clinic. I think it may still be called the Combined Clinic, where multiple consultants and sports medics, prominent sports medicine doctors would come down and perform a monthly combined clinic. And this is tricky patients they may have on their caseload, tricky patients who would need to be referred in. And then you would naturally have this combined clinic working through the patients. And as physios then in that environment, you're a band 6, you were as the T-boy, as it were, you were plugging people in. Every now and again, if you suppose knew your stuff, you may offer an opinion, offer an assessment, but it was primarily a function of the MSc. So some of the MSc students would then have to, let's say, assess the patients and verbalise their feedback and their initial subjective assessment to the wider MDT. We'd have radiologists, sports medics, Nat Padia from a podiatry point of view, Prof. John King as an example, one of the sort of eminent first sports medics, and then Dylan sort of running the show, as it were. But learned so much. And in those early Mile End days, just had a great group of people around me. So again, going back to your earlier question, that's what did I learn then that I still maintain now. It's this team ethic. I think I've always enjoyed being part of that. And then we kind of grew up together, I suppose. Band 6s through to band 7s, a number of guys and girls who are still really good mates, people I'd call on tomorrow, came to my wedding, been to their wedding, etc. And they've all now gone their separate ways, but we all had, I would say, was a great initial starting point. The CPDs, the in-service trainings, it was all sort of largely formalised trainings, all the band 6s, and then naturally progressed all the band 7s together. And then thereafter, so how long was I in band 6 for? Probably 2 years, 3 years, before then going into a band 7 role, which at that point we'd merged more widely or become Barts Health, and then set up the what is the Big Blue building, so the Royal London Hospital now. So I was there during that initial setup as the band 7 combined, and then another, again, prominent physio in my career, a chap called Paul Haworth, who at that point was the band 8. He was operating largely in A&E, but he was sort of natural supervisors as the band 7. So when we were sort of getting what was then more of the orthopedic MSK route set up in the Royal London Hospital, he was the one directing us, pointing us in the right direction, and getting all things running and going. So yeah, I learned so much from those I suppose 3 individuals, wider manager Sam Leake as well back in the day. And I think this is when I first started to learn a little bit more about Pure. Pure traditionally has always had a really good relationship with QMUL, linked primarily between Dylan and Claire Small. And it was, I suppose, through this process of being involved at Mile End and the Royal London Hospital that I suppose you always go through the debate of, do I do an MSc at that point, do I not? But as being in the sports gym, naturally we would see a lot of people come through, or my personal opinion at least, sorry, going back then, was we see a lot of people doing MSCs early because they had the perception that the MSc would set them apart in a difficult recruitment market or an employment market. So they were naturally jumping in too early from an MSc point of view to get as much as you could from it, in terms of being critical and appraising, I suppose, all that goes into those MSCs. So naturally, I went on to this course called the Clinical Focus course. Is how it was sort of entitled back in the day, and this was a private course that used to be linked in with the MACP route. So you would then submit a portfolio after to go down the line of MSCP registration. But it was basically, I think it was from memory, about 1 weekend every month for 12 months. And you would go and you'd have almost a joint or a body part each month that you would work through from a weekend. And again, that was run by Claire, Sam Leake, Linda Exelby, some really prominent clinicians in my career today in terms of what I've learned from those individuals. But that was my first wider exposure, I suppose, to Claire and naturally how she worked. And Linda Exelby, if you've never met her, she's just a brilliant clinician, but a great teacher and a lovely lady who's very dynamic and very easy to get on with. So it's great. And I think that sort of probably Clinical Focus course, early Royal London, Mile End, really shaped me as a clinician, but it also then let me know a little bit more about what's out there. So then it was back in 2013, May 2013, where I'd had a few of the clinicians that I worked with, so some of the fellow band 6s, band 7s, one had made a move over to pure sports medicine, a girl called Shrina Patel, who has an interesting journey herself, having been in the NHS to pure, back into the NHS to have children, and is now based here at Roehampton and Rains Park part-time with ourselves. So has actually been at Pure longer than myself, all told, in and out of the NHS. But she recommended that I apply basically, and that I would enjoy it. And she was working then at the Canary Wharf Clinic. Naturally then I applied. I think I went through the first interview, and then naturally Sam Wild, who's now my I suppose job share, as it were, we both do this group clinic director role, and he sent me an email which I didn't receive, went into my junk. So then I sat wondering then for I think about 4 weeks really what happened, and started to look at the other options. And at that time it was basically between Pure and 6 Physio, and I'd interviews with 6, but I hadn't gone back for a second round because I was waiting for Pure basically at that point. But then thankfully I dropped an email just to say I hadn't heard anything, and then he resent the email inviting me back for a second interview, and then it snowballed from there really. So I joined Pure in May 2013, pretty much as a specialist physio coming off the back of a band 7 role in the NHS, having spent, all told, I think it was pretty much 8 years at the Royal London and Mile End hospitals, which goes back to your earlier point in terms of this sort of, if I'm growing and if I'm developing, and if I see my next avenue of change, I'm all in. And I think that's really important for me. I think it's how I was brought up, and I'm not a quitter, as it were. And naturally, I think pushing myself in those surrounds, it was about doing things at the right time. So I did start the MSc at Hearts, but it took me 6 years to complete, and that was only because I was juggling that. And again, I started it because it was like, right, well, I probably need to do this now, having started it when I was at the Royal London Hospital. But then actually having started at Pure, it went onto the back burner for a period of time. But I did complete it, but took more of a a management slant towards the latter end of the modules. I think the nice thing there is, whilst you have to do the lower and upper quadrants from a MSc completion point of view, there's other modules that actually, for me, again, because I probably left it too late, so there's this fine balance with an MSc in terms of what are you going to learn and when are you going to learn it. But I really valued and benefited from this MSc more on the coaching and leadership modules, and there's a sort of managing change in some of these sort of further management modules you can naturally do as part of that Hearts MSc, and they were brilliant. And again, gave me skills that I felt I could apply in my management role, not so much my clinical role. I think clinical roles are you're forever learning, you're forever changing. Nobody's the finished article, and that's probably the fine balance that exists within my role now. I don't do a hefty amount of clinical, but we still have to be leading on innovation, change, appropriate treatment, techniques, applications, guiding that patient through their journey to optimization. It is a fine balance, and it's one that you continue to juggle really as you sort of, I suppose, develop from an operational management point of view and still have your clinical hat on, three shifts or 3 clinics a week.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Like, you've stayed at those two places for a long time. I think it also is those other things that you mentioned, like loyalty as well, isn't it? That you're invested in it. So it's I presume, like, because I can empathize, that it's not just because you're learning, but also it's like, actually this is, you feel like you owe the environment something as well, like you're directly contributing to it as well. Is that the case?
Yeah, because I got so much back. I think that's it. It's about the people ultimately. As I say, each of those people, Paul, Mike, Dylan, Sam Leake, Linda, like in these sort of teaching environments, or I suppose management, I took, hopefully at least, what I saw is the best of those individuals, and how they really took me along for the ride. And I think that's my role really now. I don't see it as, yes, I'm leading from the front, but primarily I want to try and get people enthused about working for pure sports medicine. Like, the longer people stay, the better they do. The longer they stay, the better Pure does. The sort of more buy-in we get from those individuals. So yeah, whether it's obligation, whether it's, I suppose part of it is respect. Part of it is respect for them as individuals. Not so much at that point. Like now, yes, with PSM, it's definitely respect for the company, what the company's done for me, and what I see it doing in future for me as well. That's the reason I stay here. When it was in the NHS and the Royal London, it was about the people, because we went through so much there. We went through a consultation period because we had to join Bart's Health, and for my sins, there was a CSP, I think CSP steward at the time. That consultation was going on, which wasn't easy. There was a lot of things being bandied around at the time in terms of influence on staff, etc., and the sort of competing arms of a redevelopment of a whole physiotherapy or MSK physiotherapy team. It was tricky, but ultimately it was the people who kept me going back, and that's why I say some of my best friends now exist naturally within that time, and they're the people you can call on for a beer and go back and see. But it was just a great learning environment. So forever grateful for those early days, as it were, and even going back to Burton Hospitals, that's what kind of initially shaped my willingness and want to be in a team, because the people there were so nice, and it did. I think my mum and dad mentioned there's a lady who's just moved in down the road. It was one of the down the road from my mum and dad, and they're sort of saying, "Oh, he was such a lovely young boy." My dad sort of takes pleasure in telling me on this lady moving down the road, and she was a band 7 at the time, part time. Was married to one of the orthopedic consultants at the hospital. So it's like, you leave good memories. I think that's part of, I suppose, my upbringing as well. It's wanting to not necessarily leave a legacy, but wanting to be remembered for the right reasons. And that, for me, you don't get that if you do 6 months. You don't get that if you do a year, really. You get it if you leave your mark, tear things up along the way. But whether it's innovation, whether it's change, all of that's probably a byproduct of time to an extent, but you have to care. And you have to want to be part of something. And if you want to be part of something, I think that's, I think you get loyalty as a byproduct.
And like, so, okay, you see that's innate from you if you've learned that from your upbringing and so on. Like, what are the things that you learned from those 3 people, for example? Like, can you pinpoint that values, characteristics of what they were?
I think the one thing they all have in common, so Paul, let's say Paul Howarth at the Royal London, Mike as this sort of first entry point into what does sports physiotherapy in an inverted commas look like, and then Claire, those three things, they all have absolute brutal honesty. Mike, famous for it. Claire, very, very tactful, but very honest and straight to the point, sorry. Paul, again, very honest, but he did it a little bit more softly, I suppose. So that was the one thing that they all had in common, and it's
any
really
examples
nice.
on any of those?
Not that spring to mind, to be honest. I think it's more the persona that you take away. Like these are real characters, and you've met Dylan, also a real character, and that's I see myself as, to be honest, quite a boring individual with not much character unless I've had about 5 pints. So you're trying to take the best of those individuals, and very much the honesty was something that I tried to do, and I will try and do it I suppose in a tactful way that gets the best out of somebody, and that's where these sort of the coaching conversations around the MSc that for me taught me the most about myself, in terms of how you coach somebody through a conversation to ultimately get to the point where they may have a similar understanding that you do, but almost the perception is that they've come to that conclusion rather than me enforcing my wants, ideas, perception of the task upon them, which I was very guilty of in the past, not necessarily thinking I knew everything, but to some people that's how it came across, I think, in some of my conversations. But yeah, I think they were always driving for excellence, all three of those characters. Whether it is the right sort of assessment, whether it's the right treatment, whether it's the right outcome, like are you holding that patient to account as much as you're holding yourself to account? So that striving for excellence again rings true through all of those three characters. I think the big thing with Claire is her selflessness, and if you wanted anybody in your corner, it would be Claire Small, because we don't all get it right all the time, and at some point, let's say if it's a clinical complaint, who do I want understanding that situation and backing me? I don't think there's many people in the business who wouldn't want Claire on their side, because she understands it and she's selfless in that way, and pure is definitely part of her DNA, and that's, I mean, that's again one of the reasons why I've sort of hung around. You get people who care that much, they're going to make the right decisions for the right reasons, and that's a really important part of the continued growth of Pure. You have people in that model who very much they care about excellence, they care about profession, they care about quality, and that really runs through all three of those individuals in my past, as it were.
Yeah, and I think even what you were saying there about they're all three of them have got the same things, but deliver it in a maybe different way or slightly different. And I think that being authentic to me is a massively important trait. You've acknowledged your mate is maybe different, as everyone's is different. So, from your perspective, how important is that authenticity for you, for the team, for recruitment, anything like that? And how would you look for that?
I mean, it's one thing, not that we've struggled with, but it's one thing I think we chatted the other week, myself and you, about how do we go through these sort of personality traits within a recruitment process. Like, we try and be as authentic, as honest as possible in terms of what we feel we're looking for in a candidate and what we feel we're looking for in terms of making a success of being a clinician in our model and in London, I suppose. And it all comes down to authenticity. Like, we try and be as honest and as authentic as possible. I think the difficulty we have sometimes is when people are, from a recruitment point of view, let's say, are going to interview, most of the time they're going to say what they think you want to hear. Whether it's authentic or not, I don't think often 2 interviews, which is a natural process, we have 2 interviews. Is it enough? It's probably not. That the proof's always in the pudding, and I think you're often taking a chance. You can have these questions, you can go through your personality profiling, but ultimately when it comes down to it, are they really that person who will follow up? Will they be authentic on what they said? Will they go the extra mile? Will they squeeze that patient in there because that's the demand of the patient, and it is that only time that individual can get your expertise? And if it is, then authentically, that's what we need to be doing, and they're the bits that I suppose for us, it's going the extra mile that very much sets you apart. Honesty, authenticity, probably 2 big ones that all those individuals had. but very much for me, at least personally, something that I think that sometimes there's a way to deliver authenticity, which not so much those three individuals, but definitely some of the managers in the past, I've learned from the ways they've done things. Like, okay, maybe I wouldn't have either phrased that in that way or put it across in that way. The authenticity for me comes from understanding what are we here to achieve, and if there's always a reason behind it. So if you're trying to manage a clinician who may well be underperforming in a traditional sense, why is that? And the authenticity then comes from let's say a conversation around that initial patient presentation. Nobody comes to us, let's say as a private company, not expecting to need to have a follow-up. But what they need to have in the authenticity from a physio perspective is you need to be able to communicate effectively. This is what I think you need, and you need to genuinely believe it, and you need to be able to sort of spell that out to an individual and a patient to authentically deliver a treatment plan that you feel will optimize their recovery. Now, all you can do as a clinician is put that over to a patient. They don't want to take it, absolutely fine. But we know at least then that person's done their best job at taking that person on a journey. And if they recurringly are not necessarily they're having that message land, then it may well be, how do we assist the physio in their personal growth? Do we look at further training and all this sort of stuff that helps them deliver their authentic response? But yeah, going back to really a point, for me, authenticity in itself is a key point, as is honesty. But I think some of that takes, you have to get to know people. And I think that's probably one of the challenges we have now as we grow, or as we get more clinicians and more people. There was always a time when I knew everybody's name. And that's becoming more and more difficult, both with my ability to remember names as I get older, part one, but also as the company grows, which is sad. But that's also why you need I suppose, a growing management team that grows with the business, so that you can carry the same messages. You can just not myself, Sam, Claire, who've obviously been with the business for a number of years. It can be more than just us driving this forward, which is why, whether it's recruitment, whether it's our promotional process or people applying for management positions, you want to have it all was carrying some degree of consistency that allows that authenticity to ring true.
Yeah, and how do you keep? You can see that you've got a real interest in all of the soft skills and the non-clinical side as well as that side. So how do you keep upskilled on that side from a personal, books or courses? How do you do it?
Standpoint or
For
standpoint?
from the management, from those developing, like you talk about coaching, development structures, all of these things. It's very well, it's on the business side of healthcare.
Yeah, I think that I suppose, I think there's a personal interest in it, part one, which always helps. And naturally, if I look at my career progression and growth today, it's always sort of gone down that line. I most of the time I work well in, I suppose, silos of information. So for me, it's more like, what can I do for a period of time? They're pretty intense on. Learn more, try and take more from it. So there's it's helped to grow a management course that the government ran post pandemic, where they were subsidising external courses. So I did help to grow management, which was predominantly for medium business enterprises or medium to small business enterprises, and that basically had a range of modules that you would naturally enter into, and then lead to anything. You don't get a BSc, you don't get an MSc on the end of it, but it was structured, and that's the way my head works. If I'm looking at it going, right, I've got this course on that date, and there's a degree of information that I need to either read for then or try and take in by then, I'll do it. If it's constant, I struggle. So I'm not one who would be forever on a leadership podcast, as an example, or forever reading books on leadership. For me, I have larger interests outside of that. That's why I suppose I delved into professional sport when I was in Staffordshire, in terms of some work with the FA and a little bits here and there. But my Saturdays were too precious to me, and my interests, and having a young family now, all the sort of bits around the edges. I have probably a larger interest in listening to a football podcast or a comedy podcast on my train journeys in than I do sometimes to a leadership one. But I will go in silos of big work. So next year, as an example, I'm probably going to start an MBA, just to continue pushing that little avenue of continued growth that is a personal thing. It's not asked of me, it's not pushing me down that route from a senior management point of view. It's just some way that I can personally progress. And I think everyone's different in that. Some people will absolutely delve into it and they might drip feed in more gradually, but it just doesn't work for me personally to drip feed in information. I have to be all in, I suppose, for a period of time and then be comfortable to retain parts of that information and draw upon it naturally thereafter.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you definitely, again, going back to being authentic, you know what works for you and what you're interested in and what your external things are as well. So in terms of, if you, to make it more specific, if someone was interested in working for pure sports medicine, what would your advice be to them? Like when what's the best approach for it?
I think there's because me and Stan Ward, who's my alter ego, we sort of look at it, go, right, do people not apply sometimes through fear? Because when I was applying, there was an element of kudos associated with pure sports medicine, like, am I good enough question? And that still happens, I think probably less than it used to. And that's one of our challenges from a business point of view, is like, how do we soften our external, I suppose, visuals to prospective employees without softening our stance on excellence? And that's linked to the governance that sits within as an example. But yeah, the big thing is that we don't have a time frame, like a minimum level of, we're not a company who outwardly says you need to be 5 years minimum experience before you come and join us. We review every CV, so every CV that gets sent to us, we review a cover letter in terms of why you want to work there, and you can set yourself apart in a cover letter if you're, and it's again, it's the age-old adage of a CV should be no longer than 1 or 2 pages, and a cover letter should be no longer than a page. But it needs to be punchy. It needs to be, this is the place I want to be, and I see my personal growth there. And I think we're confident in our governance to the extent that we can grow clinicians, we can improve clinicians, and our processes that exist, whether it's patient management planning, our use of outcome measures, our auditing of outcome measures, I suppose leading the way on electronic and automated collection of outcome measures with a company called Simplicity. All of this exists in the background to make this business function. And as a result of that, the clinicians themselves help each other to grow. And then naturally the support network and the governance around it helps them grow. So there's no set levels of experience or anything like that people need, but you've got to want to be here and you've got to want to know it's going to be hard. But ultimately the rewards are I'll grow as a clinician. If I'm a busy clinician, naturally you get remunerated on the back of that. And I suppose some of it, when we're looking at the CVs, it's where's that experience been? Going back to your earlier point, have they been someone who's flitted 6 months to 6 months to 6 months? Because the reality for our business is, for it to be worth our while, if we're committing to base salary or a contractor role, the amount of time and effort we put into induction and upskilling people to all of our processes, part one, but then equally the growth in time and some of the consultant links and all these relationships that exist internally and then externally with the medical providers, it takes us probably a year to get the best out of people. And that's quite a big commitment naturally. But if you've moved every 6 months, then what's to say you're going to stay with us for a year, or if not 2 years is our expected minimum commitment. It's not to say people don't leave before that for the right reasons. But yeah, for that person to really be all singing or dancing, it takes probably about a year to 2 years. And then at that point, the company's doing well because of that individual, but they're also profiting part one, but have also grown massively and understand the business and are able to integrate themselves, grow thereafter.
Yeah. Yeah, no, again, it goes back to that, just being transparent with what you're looking for. And yeah, I think you can, when you look people in the eyes and tell them that clearly, you hope you're going to get that across, and that you're kind of trying to remove all those barriers of, don't try and say something that you're not or whatever, which is, it's difficult because everyone does it, but you're trying to cut through that as much as possible.
We always say, and Claire will always do the second round interviews for all clinicians, and ultimately it's like, expect a minimum of 2 years. And everyone's like, yeah, absolutely, no problems. Wouldn't expect anything different. And for the most part, it happens. But sometimes that doesn't work for us, and it can be right. Everybody's best intentions, they might not click. Like some of the best clinicians we've had just don't click on paper, clinicians, and because they just can't get that patient on board. And some of that's the demographics of the clinic, some of that's understanding the environment you work in, but you have to have your hook. As a clinician, you have to get that person on board with the plan and enthused about their personal growth just as much as their improvements in pain.
Yeah. Great. No, lovely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your insight, and hopefully people are interested in joining the company as well, because I think it's great to see its progression. I've been to the number of the clinics. It's a really great place to be. Got a great team. So not that this is meant to be a promotional thing for pure sports medicine, but I genuinely believe that. So well done with all of that, and I really appreciate you sharing your journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, Andy.